Well, welcome, class, to our first ed puzzle of the new year. Happy 2021. Um, Welcome back. Here we're in our last 3 weeks, just under 3 weeks of the quarter. Remember, no final exams this semester due to our just combination of online and all the craziness of a year of COVID. Praying your New Year's and your Christmas were full of joy and peace. Um, but now we do have some serious work to get into. So as I introed with you in person on our Zoom a few minutes ago, we're gonna jump right into the Book of Exodus. Um, Remember, you have on Wednesday quiz on Genesis 17, 1 through 4, which we've already reviewed. But just by way of reminder, make sure that gets on your schedule. Don't miss that. Um, so let's jump right in. First thing is we want to look at the structure of Exodus. Remember, we've been memorizing, or we've been maybe not memorizing, but learning the structure of the various books that we've been studying. That structure helps us piece the story together. It helps us navigate our Bibles, and helps us to get a little bigger sense of where the story is going. So we're going to see in a minute that that Exodus 1 is going to really just pick up right where Exodus left off. Now, there's going to be a large span of years in the middle that we're not going to get any story about, but it's going to pick up right where it really. Yeah, it's going to pick up right where Genesis left off, really indicating this is really one story. And Genesis 1 to 18. Now, notice I've said on the slide here, it's structure of Exodus, and then I've noted what's on the test. So Exodus is going to be structured really simply here, just three things. Exodus 1 to 18 is about the slavery in Egypt and liberation. So it's the story of Israel being freed from its slavery. The central story of the Old Testament is slaves being freed. Okay? Keep that in mind. Okay. And from there, then Exodus 19 through 24 is God giving the law. Israel is now going to be an independent people, an independent nation. They need to know how to live. Right? And then after that, 25 to 40 is going to be instructions about the tabernacle. And we'll look at that later. We'll look at that next quarter. Hopefully we'll be able to watch a video. I got to figure out how to do that logistically. But there's the tabernacle, which is going to lead us right into the book of Leviticus, because while they need to know how to function as a nation sort of legally and politically, and Exodus 19 to 24 is going to give us a lot of that, they need to know how to function as a nation in terms of worship. And so the end of the book of Exodus is about building the tabernacle, which then leads into the book of Leviticus, which is really all about worship. At the center of who the Israelite people are is worship. Right? So we're going to look at that in much more detail next quarter. That's going to take up a lot of really the rest of the year. Is how do we live, like socially, politically? What is justice? What's the right way to live? And at the center of that is worship. You can't have right justice without right worship, and you can't have right worship without right justice. And so that's really going to consume the rest of Torah for us. But before we get there, we've got to get a sense of this slavery and liberation story. This is really at the heart of the book of Exodus and the Torah. Remember, we said Genesis is really an extended historical prologue to that covenant, the Mosaic covenant, which is going to happen here in Exodus 20. So here's why I say what's on the test, because I've also given you on your notes, if you look at page 1, you can see that, a much more detailed breakdown of what's happening in the book of Exodus. You see, at the very beginning, you see, the problem, right? Israel's enslaved. And that's that's problematic. Then it gets really problematic in that there's a genocide. Pharaoh tries to wipe out the Israelite people. And in the midst of that genocide, you have the birth of, well, maybe what we expect to be the hero. Maybe he's not the hero. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But at very least, we have the birth of the means by which the rescue is going to occur. Um, and then you get a little bit more story, and then you get his mission. Then you get his negotiating with Pharaoh, which leads us into the plagues, which leads us into the exodus from Egypt. They're finally going to leave, and then there's this long walk to Mount Sinai, where Israel's going to meet God, and they're going to receive the covenant. Okay, so that's what we're going to try to do in the next 2.5 weeks, is walk through this story very quickly. Now, I'm hoping that it's sort of familiar to you, that you've seen either the Ten Commandments, um, or you've seen Prince of Egypt, or this is a story that you've talked about over and over again in Sunday school. That's my hope. Now, I realize that may not be the case for some. So you may have noted, like, we've read this already. Reading Guide 4, I think, or maybe it was Reading Guide. Yeah, they were Reading Guide 5. You read this story. Okay. Now, you also have a larger, again, a broken down explanation of the structure. That's here, and we'll look at that more next quarter. Okay. So let's jump into Exodus 1. This is page 2 of your notes. Notice no extended, no new vocab, or at least no new extended vocab. There's a couple of words or a couple of ideas that are going to come up, but no big new vocab section, no vocab quiz this unit. So we're on page 2 of your notes, and we're just gonna read through Exodus 1, and then we'll go back and explain some things along the way. Okay. It says, "These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. All the descendants of Jacob were 70 persons. Joseph was already in Egypt. When Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation, but the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, who did not know Joseph." Now, no, like, about 400 years has passed. Okay. He said to his people, "Behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, and they join our enemies and fight against us, and escape from the land." Therefore they set taskmasters over them, and afflicted them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pitmoth and Ramses. Uh, but the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people work as slaves, and they made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick, and in all kinds of work in the field, and all their lands. And in all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. Then the Egyptian king said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shipra and the other Puah, when you serve as midwife. Remember, a midwife is one who is sort of like a doctor. It's one who delivers a baby. It's a person who specializes in delivering a baby. Um, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him. But if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them. but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives to them, and said to them, "Why have you done this? And let the male children live." The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew strong. Because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, uh, every male born to the Hebrews, you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live." Now, let's sort of back up here, sort of a pause in the story, or we're going to pause the story there, sort of awkward pause, um, given that there's so much more to be said. It's a dramatic thing to say. Um, we're just gonna look back now. Joseph and his brothers, um, and their whole generation died. Right, so like all the sons of Israel, all the sons of Jacob, passed away, and the people were living in the land. They were fruitful and multiply in the land of Egypt, in the land of Goshen in particular, for 400 years. If we were in a normal circumstance, I'd show you a video in uh, that's shot in Egypt. You can see just how beautiful the land of Goshen is. It's like Joseph really settles them in the best land of Egypt, some of the most fruitful farming land in the world because of the Nile. And they were fruitful there because of that Abrahamic blessing. God was continuing to fulfill the Abrahamic blessing in Israel, and so like the Israelites were prospering sort of ahead of the Egyptians. They didn't have maybe the political power, but they were fruitful. Their crops were fruitful. They were having children. Their animals were fruitful. Now, remember, well, it says a new king arose over Egypt. Now, this is uh, really not unusual, or in terms of monarchies, in terms of dictatorships, kings come and go, right? They may rule for a long time, they may rule for a short time, and you may have a change of kingdom. Maybe a pharaoh doesn't have a surviving son, or maybe there's sort of a civil war. Egyptian politics are messy. In fact, because of the way the Egyptians kept historical records, i.e., like they only recorded their victories, knowing who all the pharaohs were, and in what order they lived is sort of tricky. Like with our genealogies, we know genealogies are often selective, almost always selective. And so what we have with the Egyptian king lists is that they don't match. They're they're recorded selectively. Um, so you have a new pharaoh that arises, one who doesn't know Joseph. Now, it could be that he knows who Joseph is and doesn't care. He feels no loyalty to Joseph, or maybe just enough time has passed that he has no recollection of why he just has legitimately no knowledge why the Hebrews there. They've just always been there. How they get here, we don't know, but they're a problem. Um, uh, so he decides that the Israelites are a threat. They're not fully Egyptian. Now, there's some note among the rabbis, and I think this is important to note, that the first problem that Israel encounters here in Egypt isn't physical slavery, but spiritual slavery. It seems rather likely, given what, or well, not even rather likely, it seems certain, given the rest of the story, that the first struggle that Israel had was a spiritual one. That the Israelites likely encountered, or that the Israelites did in fact encounter, um, uh, the Egyptian gods, the Egyptian way of life, which was particularly, at least at this point, had become particularly anti-God, and they had become like spiritually involved. They become involved in the idols of Egypt. They were taken in by the attractiveness of the Egyptian way of life, the Egyptian religion, and so they had become spiritually enslaved to idols. They were worshiping the created, not the creator. So while they were, at least for a time, rather like physically successful, they were successful people here in Egypt, they were becoming spiritually enslaved. And so God was going to need to free them from that. But to allow the Israelites to recognize their spiritual slavery, God allows them to be also physically enslaved. Now remember, at the end of the book of Genesis, God uh, it empowers Joseph, right? And Joseph uses his power to save the Egyptians. But one of the things that happens in his saving of the Egyptians is that the Egyptian people spend all of their money buying grain from Joseph. They sell all their land and their property to buy grain from Joseph in order to survive the 7 years of famine. Finally, they really sell themselves to where you get in Egypt, something that might be really akin to maybe like an extreme form of socialism, something like that, where like Pharaoh, the government, owned the entire country, and really, in a sense, owned all of the people. Now, for much of that time, this was very kind and generous a form of government. Pharaoh basically oversaw the production of or the entirety of the economy in Egypt. So people worked a 10-day week. Um, they worked seven, rested three. During the harvesting months, um, uh, everybody, or at least seemingly everybody, had a home and a farmstead that they farmed. Then, when harvest was over and when winter came and the Nile flooded, this is vital. It's called the inundation of the Nile. The Nile floods its banks, and in doing so, when it floods, it creates rich farmland. That flooding brings silt out of the mountains and brings organic matter and more than you need to know. Just know that when it floods, it leaves a really rich soil behind. So when it floods, when winter comes, when there's no farming, Pharaoh would then move people to to employment in like work cities. So they would build the monuments, they would build uh, the the facilities, the armies, all the things that a nation needs. Um, People would be employed through the pharaoh, through the government, to build these things, and it was a good life. By and large, okay, in a sense, maybe you were a slave, or you were at least everyone was employed by the government, but the wages were decent, the livelihood was good. And again, all of this is facilitated by that steady water source, the Nile. The Nile gives them a decent source of food, a really abundant source of food, which allowed them to do all these other technological and military things. If you don't have a source of food, if you don't have a stable food source, you don't have time for technology. You don't have time for armies. You'll note, like, if you look at education, students that struggle with food insecurity tend to struggle in school. If you're hungry, there's not a lot of paying attention that can happen. That's why they say, like, look, eat breakfast. Make sure you eat something in the morning. Because if you're hungry, you're not going to learn. So people who are spending all of their time seeking out food don't get a chance to do things like build pyramids. Um, so the Israelites and really all of Egypt were employed this way, and it was a nice life. Um, and so Pharaoh takes this step to enslave the Israelites. He's going to treat them more harshly. He's going to treat them more severely, which is funny. He's concerned that they're enemies, but his very actions are turning a friendly ally into an enemy. Sort of ironic. And he treats them harshly. He sets taskmasters over them and afflicted them with heavy burdens. And they built for Pharaoh the store cities of Pitmoth and Ramses. There's some archaeological debate here about where that is and when that was. That's beyond the scope of our course, but an interesting sort of historical question. And they were more oppressed, but the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and the more they spread abroad. So Pharaoh treats them harshly. They prospered in spite of his harsh treatment. Now, look, this slavery here, maybe not a huge deal, hard, unpleasant, but we don't hear Israel sort of crying out at this moment. They're still like well fed and well paid and well taken care of, even though they're sort of being worked really really hard. It describes it as ruthless. So not pleasant, and yet not maybe not the worst. Now it turns really sinister. Right? Pharaoh seeks to employ the midwives, or the doctors of Egypt, to murder the male children of Israel. Now, what's the goal here? Well, the goal is to leave the Israelites without sons. What? Why is that? Why is that a thing? Why would he want to do that? Why not just wipe out all of them? Well, that might be a little bit difficult. He may not have sufficient army to do that, to sort of start a civil war. But remember, inheritance passes from son to son, or from father to son, from son to from father to son. It passes through males, right? Well, if you have a generation that doesn't have any sons and only has daughters, who are those daughters going to marry? Well, they're going to have to marry Egyptians. So what Pharaoh is trying to do is trying to sort of take the inheritance from the Israelites and really remove from Israel their like cultural and ethnic identity. He wants all of the Israelite women who are apparently blessed, right, to have to marry Egyptian men. He doesn't want to like destroy the Israelites. He wants to sort of assimilate them, consume them by committing an act of genocide. And the way he wants to do this is he wants to like make the doctors do it. So he gives them this instruction. Maybe he offers to pay them. Maybe there's a sort of a reward or a threat that goes along with it. But the midwives are not compliant. Um, uh, like any good midwife, any good doctor is going to look at a newborn baby and love it and see it as life and a gift from God. So Pharaoh gives this sort of vain command that the Hebrew midwives ought to murder the boys, maybe sort of to do it discreetly. Oh, I'm sorry, your child has died, and this wouldn't be an uncommon thing. The death rate amongst newborns at this point would have been significantly higher than it is today. Um, but he says, kill them before the mother sees that they're alive. It's a horrid, horrid, horrid thing to say, to command even. This is deep wickedness. The enslaving is wicked. This is deep, deep wickedness, right? Um, but the midwives feared God. They feared God more than Pharaoh. They feared the judgment of God more than the punishment of Pharaoh. They desired a right relationship with God, the God of Israel, more than they desired the rewards of Pharaoh. So they didn't do it. Like, no, we're not doing this. This is crazy. Um, Praise God, they did. Shipra and Pua, sort of the leaders of them, and they're called before Pharaoh. Why haven't you obeyed my command? And I assume this is a lie, and yet it's beautiful, right? They said, "Oh, Pharaoh, we were gonna, but the Hebrew women, they're just so much more vigorous, so much stronger than the Egyptian women. They just give birth before we even arrive. And here you have them like sort of insulting Egyptian women, um, complimenting Hebrew women as being super strong, and just like totally BSing the Pharaoh. And again, the Pharaohs are seen sort of as godless fools. And he's like, dang, I thought that would work. And lets them go. And God blesses the midwives. They get husbands and they have families of their own. And Pharaoh's like wicked plan is thwarted by this simple act of righteousness. And I say, like, well, wait, but they lied. Okay, yeah, but they defended life. God's going to over and over again prioritize life. God, in the midst of this, blesses them. Okay. Um, um, Now, Pharaoh then doubles down. He says, I can't trust the Hebrew midwives to do this thing. Therefore, he's going to have to make an even bigger command. He says, Pharaoh commanded to all the people, every son that is born to the Hebrews, you shall cast into the Nile. But you shall let the daughters live. So Pharaoh makes this proclamation to all of Egypt. every Hebrew male child should be cast into the Nile. Now that's an insane thing. If you think of like a president, or like a mayor, and maybe like I go to church down in DC. If Mayor Bowser said, okay, every male child born in DC must be cast into the Potomac, people would be like, "You crazy, right?" Like she'd end up in a hospital or in an asylum or in prison. Like this is an insane thing to our way of thinking. So how did Pharaoh make this command? Well, one, he's a dictator. He can command whatever he wants, and people are like he's got the backing of the military, of the government. People are going to feel some pressure to comply. But how do you convince a people to do this sort of thing? Well, remember, or maybe not remember, but like so you know, like in Egypt, everything is a god, right? Like all the living things, like Pharaoh's a god, the animals are god. The Nile was seen as a god. It was Osiris's bloodstream, I think. Yeah, Osiris's bloodstream was the Nile. It was the means by which Osiris and a number of other gods who were associated with it were gave blessings to the people of Egypt. So they likely what this was seen as was as a sacrifice. The sacrifice that the gods want from us is to take the Hebrew children, Hebrew boys, and cast them into the Nile as an offering. This is deep, deep wickedness, right? Remember the end of the story, the end of the Exodus story, not the end of Torah, the end of the Exodus story. What does God take from the Egyptians? See, we're going to talk about justice a little bit later on. And here what we have is this extraordinary act of justice. God is going to take the firstborn sons of all of Egypt. Pharaoh wanted to take the inheritance, wanted to take the sons from Israel. He's going to try. He's going to largely fail. We're going to see. But God is going to be successful in taking the sons of Egypt from the Egyptians. Um, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, life for life. Um, God is going to do justice here in Egypt. Um, now, so it seems that this order is sort of short lived, and probably rooted in some sort of religious claim. So uh, how long is this order in place? We don't really know, or at least I don't know. But there's never any statement of, well, the Israelites ran short of men. It just doesn't happen. Now we're going to see in chapter 2, I think it must last at least 3 months, or probably lasts at least a year. But then it could be that the pharaoh dies. May have been that like it was a sort of year-long thing, and sort of a year-long proclamation. We're going to have a festival to Osiris. All the Hebrew boys must be cast into the sea this year. Again, trying to like sort of make inroads into sort of habituating the Israelites and marry their daughters to Egyptians, which they apparently hadn't been doing or hadn't been doing much. Um, he's trying to sort of slow roll or sort of long con the Israelites out of their men, right? Um, uh, um, but this doesn't appear to work, at least not long term. Though it would appear that many Hebrew boys were cast into the sea. That he does enact this sort of form of genocide. Maybe it was poorly enforced. Maybe it was short-lived. We're not entirely sure. But this is the thing that really, really, I think, infuriates the people of God, the Israelites, who had sort of forgotten God, and the thing that is going to infuriate God against the Pharaoh and against the sort of the gods of Egypt. So let's look at chapter 2. And this is where the story takes the turn. So in chapter 1, we've seen we have seen the problem established. Egyptians are seeking to commit genocide against the Israelites. They've enslaved, partially treated the Israelites. And it's in the midst of that oppression, in the midst of that darkest hour, that a hero, a savior of sorts, is going to emerge. Now, a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and she saw that he was a fine child. She hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of pitch and bulrushes, and dabbed it with bitumen and pitch. Um, and she put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, where the young woman walked beside the river, where her young women walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent her servant women, and she took it. Now, an interesting story, right? So here's this command, right, to throw the baby boys into the sea. This Levite woman and her husband, we don't get their names, which is sort of unfortunate. We probably get them in the genealogies later. Um, uh, After 3 months of sort of hiding him, when she realized that she could hide him no longer, she made a basket and she waterproofed it. Okay, and this basket picture this basket as sort of the ark of Noah's ark, right? This is going to be the means by which this is the ark by which the people of God are going to be saved. So she seals it with tar, as her waterproofs it, and she places it among the reeds. Now, in the movies, we always see them like sort of push him out into the river. That's not what it says. It doesn't say that he took this sort of long journey down the river and just sort of happened to land somewhere. That's not what it says. It says put him amongst the reeds. Why do you put him among the reeds? So he doesn't go anywhere. So here you have them. So this Levite couple complying with the letter of the law. Throw your baby boys into the Nile. Well, they put him in the Nile, but not the way that it was intended, right? They followed the letter of this cruel Egyptian law, but they didn't follow the spirit of it, right? They didn't follow the intent. They placed him in the Nile, fulfilling the law, but did not like cast him to his death, to the crocodiles or to drowning or whatever. Um, uh, they placed him safely among the reeds in the riverbank. Now it says that the daughter of Pharaoh, it was the place where the daughter of Pharaoh came out to bathe, her and her servants. That's interesting. So I wonder if they knew. I wonder if they knew that this was the spot. I wonder if they picked this spot strategically. See, trusting God doesn't mean that we like lack wisdom, that we lack cunning, that we lack strategy or plan. See, like the daughter of Pharaoh comes out to bathe, and when she saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her servant woman, and she took it. When she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying, and she took pity on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrew children." Then his sister, the sister of the child, her name is Miriam, we'll find out later, said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse from among the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the girl went and called the child's mother, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him, and the child grew. When the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she named him Moses, because she said, "I drew him out of the water." This is fascinating, right? Here's we've sort of, I think, become accustomed to seeing, if you've seen some of the movies, it's sort of happening by accident, by happenstance. But it seems like, if here you have this princess, this royal princess. Now, again, daughters weren't of the same status as sons, right? The princes maybe would have been far more secure. But she's a daughter of the sitting pharaoh. She has servants, maybe a large number of servants with her. as well as maybe friends and attendants. And she finds this child, and who talks to her right away? Well, the boy's sister. That'd be a bold thing. If you're a slave to just walk up randomly to some woman of status that you don't know and start making suggestions, that would be sort of strange. Maybe it's not unknown. Maybe Miriam is one of the attendants, one of the servants, one of the slaves of Pharaoh's daughter. Maybe they sort of planned this strategically. What's Pharaoh's daughter's story? Well, we don't know. We don't have any idea what her story is. What we know is that, yeah, we don't know. So we're left to speculate, right? Um, could it be that she's got a big family of her own and loves kids? Maybe the daughter, maybe Miriam knows this. Maybe she's simply deeply compassionate. Miriam knows this. Maybe she's, well, barren herself, not her and her husband not able to have any children, and so she wants a child of her own, and Miriam knows this, and so sort of places her brother in that place to be raised by this kind and generous Egyptian woman who longing for a child of her own. Maybe she's been widowed. Her husband died in battle or of disease. Maybe she's got daughters but no son and longs to have a son, something like that. We don't know. But what seems to be the case is that Miriam and her family are sort of playing the daughter of Pharaoh here. Like they place their son in the reeds right where she goes down to the Nile to bathe. She finds him. When she finds him, she takes pity on him, and immediately Miriam says, "Well, you could hire a wet nurse. You could hire one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you until he's ready to be adopted into your family." So they're placing that idea in the daughter of Pharaoh's mind sort of right away. And she agrees, and then she pays Moses' mother to nurse him. Again, maybe because they're part of that their family is a part of sort of the slaves of this household, or they're maybe sort of attendants to Pharaoh's daughter. Um, it's interesting. It's brilliant in its planning, and like blessed by God in it. Um, so now, one of the things, if you've seen the movies, one of the things we need to correct from the Exodus movies is the movies struggle to see who the hero is and who the villain is, and to understand the dynamics and the drama, and so they want to create drama. And the drama that the movies often create is to sort of create a sibling rivalry between the son of Pharaoh and the son and Moses. But is Moses a son of Pharaoh? No. Moses is an adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter. Some of you even wondered, well, was Moses maybe the favored son? Was Moses in line to become the Pharaoh? No, not at all. Moses was not adopted by Pharaoh. Moses was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter. Remember, inheritance doesn't pass from father to daughter, from Pharaoh to Pharaoh's daughter, and then from Pharaoh's daughter to Pharaoh to her sons. No. It passes from Pharaoh to Pharaoh's son, grandson, great grand down. Pharaoh, likely having dozens, if not more, wives, was likely to be short of sons. This daughter of his, okay, of royal birth, a woman of status, wealthy, I'm sure, probably married to to a man of status. If she's married, uh, her children have no part in sort of the royal lineage, and the idea that Moses and the Pharaoh that would follow were sort of brothers, best friends, has no place in the text. It is even probably fairly unlikely. Maybe they knew each other. But one of the things that we're going to see is that Moses is going to live 40 years in Egypt. He's then going to live 40 years in the desert. Then he's going to come back and lead the people out of Egypt. So the idea that at 80, Moses is dealing with a Pharaoh that he sort of grew up with. It's rather unlikely that lifespans are pretty short. Pharaohs get knocked off often enough. They die in battle. They're replaced. So it could be that Moses at 80 is dealing with a Pharaoh who's 18 or 22 or 40. Okay? So this whole idea of sort of sibling rivalry is just unknown in the text. In fact, like Pharaoh's going to be a villain, but really it's the idolatry, the gods of Egypt that are the real villains here. And while Moses, we're going to see this in a minute, Moses is the means by which Israel is freed. God is the one who's going to be the hero. God's the hero, not Moses. So this whole like rivalry thing, this like brotherhood thing between Moses and the Pharaoh that's sort of ripping apart a Pharaoh, just really doesn't have any place in the text. Um, Moses is not in line for a significant inheritance from Egypt. Certainly not in line for a royal inheritance in Egypt. He's a man of some status. He's known in the household of Pharaoh, but not sort of in line. If he had been, there's no way that the wife of Pharaoh would have been allowed to adopt Moses because that would have been a threat to the inheritance. Um, okay, where are we? Okay, so moving on now. One day, when Moses had grown up, again, traditionally he's 40 here, he had gone out to his people. Apparently, he's aware that he's a Hebrew. Maybe he was teased and made fun of as a kid. Maybe his mother was just very honest with him that he was adopted. Maybe Miriam and his brother Aaron, sort of maybe being a part of the slaves of that house, and hey, you're our sibling. Like, he's raised for 3 months by his mother. Maybe he has some sort of recollection of that, his awareness of who his real mother is. Um, uh, he saw an Egyptian. We're not sure who or what sort of Egyptian. Um, uh, we saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. So here, Moses does a very Egyptian thing. Again, I wish I could show you some videos about this from Egypt, but um, yeah, it's just trickier on Zoom. Um, you always see the Pharaoh, or you often see the Pharaoh with his staff raised over his hand to strike. Pharaoh leads by violence. What we're going to see is that God is going to command Moses to lead by speaking. My sheep hear my voice. They know me, they follow me. I give eternal life to them, and no one will snatch them out of my hands, Jesus says. The Middle Eastern shepherd doesn't leave by driving the sheep, by beating the sheep into where they want to go. No, that's going to ruin the sheep. An Israelite shepherd leads by speaking. He speaks to the sheep. He's always sort of talking to the sheep. If you have, I remember my grandpa being able to sort of do this with his cows. They sort of knew his voice. And with the cats, when it was time to feed the cats, grandpa would give out a call, um, and they would all come. They knew it was feeding time. Um, so Moses is gonna be, and we'll see this a little bit later. Moses is going to be trained as a shepherd. He's going to be trained. He's going to have this violent Egyptian sort of mindset removed from him, and he's going to have to relearn how to live. But here, he's going to respond to this thing, this injustice, as an Egyptian. He sees an injustice, a Hebrew man being beaten, and he murders the Egyptian for it. Is it right to defend the Hebrew who's being beaten? Yeah. Is the Egyptian doing something that rightly allows execution? No. No, it certainly doesn't seem so. This Egyptian hasn't done anything worthy of his execution, worthy of death. And Moses knows. Moses knows that he's not in the right, so he hides the body. He's not acting out of some sort of royal authority, some sort of judicial authority. It's an act of passion. So the next day, he went out. He went out the next day, and behold, two Hebrew men were struggling together, fighting. And he said to the man in the wrong, "Why are you striking your companion?" And he answered, "Who made you prince and judge over us? Do you mean to kill us like you killed the Egyptian?" Here, Moses is seeking to be a defender and a deliverer of his people, of his ethnic group, the Israelites. He's expecting to be seen as a hero by the Israelites. They don't trust him. They don't believe in him. They don't see this as an act of justice. They see this as an act of like, this is scary. This guy just killed an Egyptian. We're probably going to get blamed for it. And when he tries to intervene in a fight between two Hebrews, they expect him to come and murder one of them, not to like rightly adjudicate between them. Moses was terrified in this moment. He says, "Surely the thing is known," and indeed it was known. It got out to Pharaoh. Like they didn't, the person that he saved didn't run back and say, "Moses, man, he's our deliverer." He said, he killed an Egyptian. Like this guy's terrifying." Which he was. So Pharaoh sought to have Moses killed. Again, this isn't his much beloved son or grandson. This is that Hebrew boy that got adopted into the family. He's murdered. He deserves to be executed. And so Moses flees. He fled to the land of Midian, which is um, sort of hard to identify. It's on our map, remember? So he flees out into the desert to the Bedouin people, the people that this Midianite people who sort of travel around following the food sources with their flocks, their shepherds. Now, so here we have Moses is going to show up in Midian, and he's going to wind up at a well, right? And what happens every time? Uh, what happens every time someone shows up at a well? Well, someone's going to get married, right? In the Torah, a well is basically the ancient Near Eastern eHarmony. Um, so here's what happened. Now, the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and they drew water and uh, filled the troughs to water their father's flock. So remember, we have little girls are the shepherds. The shepherds in the Middle East are little boys, little girls, and old women. So here you have 7 little girls shepherding their father's flocks. So they're maybe in middle school, upper elementary school, maybe the oldest is in high school, and they're responsible for the flocks of their father. They've been given an extraordinary amount of responsibility compared to what typically students of that age are given in our culture. Now, other shepherds came and drove them away. So they're being here. It's a group of shepherd girls, and maybe the little shepherd boys are being sort of mistreated. They're being sort of bullied by other groups of shepherds. If you're like elementary, middle school experience was anything like mine, like this seems really familiar. Yes, of course, the meaner, crueler, tougher, bigger people are going to pick on the smaller. But Moses stood up and saved them and watered the flocks for them. Again, here's this adult man, age 40. Um, like no middle school boy is going to intimidate him. Get out, dweeb, and he waters the flocks. When they came home to their father Raul, I'm sorry, Reuel, he said, "How is it that you have come home so soon today?" Apparently, them getting like sort of bullied by the other shepherds was sort of an everyday experience, and it often took them a long time to water the sheep. And they said, "Well, an Egyptian delivered us out of the hands of the shepherds, and he even drew water for us and watered the flock. This guy by himself was able to, bucket water a whole lot faster than they were." Um, and he said to his daughters, "Well, where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat my bread, that he may eat bread." And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah. So Moses like meets with this priest of Midian. He's called Reuel here. He's gonna get the name Jethro later. So 2 names. Um, uh, uh, So he gave Moses a wife. Her name is Zipporah. And Moses dwells with him. He sort of becomes part of the family. He's this wanderer, and his act of kindness to these shepherd girls results in him having a family. And she gave birth to a son, and they named and his son was named Gershom. And for he said, "I have sojourned in a foreign land." Now, during those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery, and they cried out for help. The word there, cry out, is zakah. They screamed for help. But notice it doesn't say who they screamed to. It seems that they have forgotten God. They didn't know who to cry out to. They just cried out. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. God heard their groaning and remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God saw that the people, God saw the people of Israel, and God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. So this is where we'll pause today. We'll pick up in chapter 3 tomorrow, next time. Okay. Remember, quiz on Wednesday. Um, and you have your final homework assignment of the quarter is due on Friday. It's reading guide, I believe, reading guide 7. Right? Okay. I love you guys. God bless you. Have a great day. See you next time.